Heather O'Rourke was only 12 years old when her life ended, but the silence that followed her final breath became louder than anything she ever said on a screen. For decades, her death has lived in the shadows, twisted by rumors, dark theories, Hollywood whispers, and questions that never truly faded. She became more myth than child, more mystery than memory. And then a voice stepped forward, a voice no one expected. Henry Winkler, one of the most beloved icons in television history, a man known for warmth, kindness, and trustworthiness, suddenly made comments that shook Hollywood to its core. His words ignited outrage, fear, and a storm of speculation that spiraled so violently that even Heather's own family struggled to contain it. Tonight, we peel back those shadows, layer by layer, to uncover what he said, why he said it, and how his statements collided with a grieving family desperately trying to protect the truth. Because behind all the noise, behind the myths and curses and conspiracies, there was a real little girl whose story has been misunderstood for far too long. Before the storm, before the lawsuits, before the rumors, there was just Heather, bright, gentle, and full of a promise Hollywood never had the chance to let unfold. Heather O'Rourke's story began like the kind of Hollywood fairy tale people stopped believing in long ago, because it was too perfect, too pure, too unlikely to be real. Born on December 27, 1975, in San Diego, she grew up in a modest, hard-working family. Her mother, Kathleen, stitched clothes as a seamstress. Her father, Michael, built homes as a carpenter. Their world was simple: small moments, quiet routines, a loving home shared with Heather's older sister, Tammy. Nothing in that quiet life hinted that fate was about to open a door none of them even knew existed. In 1980, when Heather was just 5 years old, she followed her mother to the MGM commissary. Tammy had been hired as a background actress on Pennies from Heaven, and Heather was simply tagging along, just another child in a room full of Hollywood professionals. But at a nearby table sat a man whose vision was already reshaping cinema. Steven Spielberg, deep into early casting for a supernatural thriller called Poltergeist. He needed a child actress with a rare quality, angelic innocence paired with an unexplainable emotional depth, someone who could hold an audience's heart in one hand and fear in the other. And then he saw Heather. Spielberg later said he was captivated by her calmness, her poise, and the unusual stillness she carried within herself, a mixture of sweetness and seriousness that even trained adult actors struggled to imitate. In that single instant, Heather went from anonymous little girl to the one child Spielberg couldn't look away from. She won the role over dozens of experienced child actors. When Poltergeist premiered in 1982, everything changed in an instant. Her haunting delivery of the line, "They're here," didn't just make the film unforgettable, it made her unforgettable. It became one of the most iconic lines in horror history. Overnight, the quiet girl from San Diego became a star. She returned for Poltergeist Quick Books and had nearly finished filming Poltergeist just before her tragic passing. Yet despite the fame, Heather remained beautifully grounded in childhood. She became president of her 5th grade class. She attended Big Bear Elementary School. She dreamed of becoming a writer or maybe a director one day. She wasn't changed by Hollywood. She wasn't consumed by it. She was simply a child who loved performing and loved her family even more. But behind the bright lights and rising success, something else was forming. Slowly, quietly, and invisibly. A storm no one could see coming. The illness was already there, hiding beneath the surface, waiting. By the time Heather stepped into 1987, her young life seemed steady, hopeful, and full of promise. She had recently completed Poltergeist 2. Her acting career was thriving, and after years of financial struggle, her family had moved from a trailer park in Anaheim to a comfortable home in Big Bear Lake, a transformation made entirely possible because of her talent and hard work. But while everything on the outside appeared bright, something inside her body had begun to shift, something silent, dangerous, and tragically overlooked. Late in 1987, subtle signs began to surface. Heather's face would swell unexpectedly. She experienced bouts of stomach pain that came and went, like a puzzle no one could solve. Her mother noticed she got sick more frequently, but each incident seemed vague, almost dismissible, until all those little signs started forming a darker picture. Doctors examined her, searching for an explanation. Their diagnosis: Crohn's disease, a chronic inflammatory condition that affects the intestines. It felt like an answer, at least a partial one, an explanation they could understand. With that diagnosis came steroid treatments, medications, and hope that it would steady her health. But the truth, hidden deep inside her, was far more deadly. Heather didn't have Crohn's disease at all. She was living with a rare congenital intestinal stenosis, a narrowing of the intestine she had unknowingly carried since birth. It had stayed quiet for years, letting her film movies, attend a school, play with friends, and live the bright childhood everyone believed she had. But this silent defect was building toward a crisis that would erupt without warning, and then came January 1988. The night before her death, everything spiraled beyond control. Heather collapsed with excruciating stomach pain far worse than anything she had ever described before. Her face swelled rapidly, her condition deteriorating in minutes rather than hours. Her mother rushed her to the hospital, unaware she was about to witness the darkest moments any parent could endure. Heather went into septic shock. Her intestines had become completely obstructed. Infection spread quickly into her bloodstream, poisoning her tiny body from within. She suffered cardiac arrest upon arrival. Doctors revived her briefly and raised her into emergency surgery. They fought for her. They fought desperately, but the infection had taken too much, too fast. On February the 1st, 1988, Heather Michelle O'Rourke died, just 12 years old. Her death was officially ruled as complications from congenital intestinal stenosis, a rare, tragic medical misfortune. But for fans, for the public, and even some who had worked beside her, the explanation didn't feel complete. How could a cheerful child go from filming a movie to dying so suddenly? How could something so severe remain undetected? Within days, the whispers began. Hollywood tragedies rarely stay simple, and Heather's was about to be pulled into something far darker than anyone imagined. Heather's sudden death sent a wave of shock and disbelief across Hollywood. It wasn't just the loss of a promising young star. It was the speed, the severity, and the unimaginable confusion surrounding her final hours. And as often happens in Hollywood, tragedy did not remain tragedy for long. It quickly mutated into speculation, superstition, and sensational headlines. The public wanted answers. Reporters demanded explanations. Fans tried to reconcile how a healthy-looking child could spiral from life to death in a single night. Then came a theory that would haunt the franchise for decades: the poltergeist curse. By 1988, 2 actors from the film series had already died under tragic circumstances. When Heather became the third, tabloids seized the opportunity. They printed lurid headlines about dark forces, evil omens, and supernatural retribution connected to the films. Her death was dragged into rumor-fueled folklore, turning a grieving family's nightmare into entertainment for millions. But inside the O'Rourke household, grief quickly turned into another kind of a suffering. Her mother, Kathleen, wasn't just heartbroken. She was confused. When she traced Heather's medical history and revisited every symptom, every hospital visit, every overlooked sign, something inside her refused to accept the simple narrative being pushed to the public. Heather's symptoms had been misdiagnosed. She had been treated for Crohn's disease, a condition she never had. And while doctors believed they were doing the right thing, the truth was devastating. The real issue, the congenital intestinal blockage, had gone undetected. If identified earlier, corrective surgery could have been performed before the condition escalated into septic shock. This belief, this unbearable what if, pushed Kathleen into action. She filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the hospital, alleging medical negligence. The claim argued that critical signs of Heather's condition were ignored, misinterpreted, or simply not recognized in time. The lawsuit was not a search for money. It was a mother's desperate attempt to make sense of something senseless, to demand answers for the daughter she lost. The hospital denied all wrongdoing. They insisted their procedures were correct, their assessments justified. What followed was months of legal tension, arguments, counter-arguments, experts, frustration. Then, quietly, the case was settled out of court. No dramatic trial, no conclusive public explanation, just a closed door and a world full of lingering questions. But as the medical controversy began to fade, something even darker was moving into its place. Rumors that had nothing to do with illness or surgery. A voice from Hollywood was about to speak. A voice that would twist Heather's story into something far more disturbing. A voice no one saw coming. Henry Winkler. In the weeks following Heather O'Rourke's tragic death, Hollywood was already drowning in confusion, grief, and whispered theories. But no one expected the next wave, the one that would transform her story from a medical mystery into a scandalous storm of suspicion. And that wave had a name, Henry Winkler. To the world, Winkler was more than an actor. He was America's sweetheart, the iconic Fonz from Happy Days, a symbol of warmth, humor, and trust. He had worked with Heather during her guest appearance on the show, sharing scenes, conversations, and the gentle mentorship that older actors often extend to promising children. That's why his comments hit so hard, and why they spread like wildfire. Shortly after Heather's death, Winkler gave statements that were vague, yet deeply unsettling. He suggested, without naming names, without offering specifics, that Heather's passing might not have been purely medical. His tone implied the possibility of trauma, of wrongdoing, of dangers within the entertainment industry that no one wanted to discuss publicly. It was a whisper wrapped in authority, a suggestion born from a man the public trusted, and it was enough to ignite an inferno. Within days, tabloids twisted his words into sensational accusations. Some reported that Heather had been sexually abused. Others falsely implied she had taken her own life. Conspiracy theorists pounced, weaving elaborate and grotesque narratives with no evidence to support them. What began as one actor's ambiguous statement quickly became a cultural explosion, dark, toxic, and nearly impossible to contain. Fans were horrified. Reporters demanded answers. Hollywood scrambled to distance itself from the implications, but the people hurt most were the ones already suffering. Heather's family, Kathleen O'Rourke and her older daughter Tammy, were blindsided. They had spent years caring for Heather on every film set, every television appearance. They knew her routines, her moods, her fears, her joys, and they knew the rumors were impossible. According to the family, Heather was never left alone on set, not even for a moment. Her mother, her sister, or a studio teacher was always beside her. There were no signs of trauma, no sudden behavioral changes, no secrets buried behind her smile. Yet the damage was done. Winkler never clarified his meaning, never retracted the suggestion, never explained what he intended to say. Whether he misspoke or truly believed something darker was at play remains unknown. But his comments left a permanent scar, one that grew into a myth the family would battle for decades. A myth that twisted Heather's final days into something unrecognizable and unbearably cruel. The O'Rourkes had already lost their little girl. Now they were losing control of her legacy. As the rumors tightened their grip on Heather O'Rourke's memory, her family found themselves facing a second heartbreak, one as painful, in its own way, as the moment they lost her. They were no longer grieving just a daughter or a sister. They were now fighting a war against distortion, against lies, against a story that was mutating into something cruel and grotesque. Kathleen O'Rourke, still living in the raw ache of loss, watched helplessly as tabloids transformed her daughter's tragedy into a carnival of conspiracy. Suddenly, Heather's name was being dragged through headlines that had nothing to do with who she truly was. Every rumor felt like another wound, another theft of the little girl she had raised, protected, and cherished. This wasn't the Heather she knew, and Kathleen refused to let the world forget the truth. But it wasn't just Kathleen who stepped forward. It was Tammy, Heather's older sister. Years later, in a sincere and emotional interview on the Fan Counters podcast, Tammy confronted the rumors head-on. Her voice carried both a strength and heartbreak as she dismantled every false narrative. She spoke of the sister she knew intimately, the one who loved to laugh, who loved to learn, who loved being home as much as she loved being on set. She reminded the world that Heather was never left unsupervised, not in the studio, not on location, not at any point throughout her young career. Their family was always present, always vigilant, always aware of the environment around her. The accusations suggested by Henry Winkler's comments weren't just wrong. They were impossible. There had been no trauma, no hidden suffering, no darkness behind Heather's eyes. Just a normal, joyful child living an extraordinary life. But rumors have a strange power. They linger even when disproven. They stain even when washed away with truth. Winkler's comments, however vague, however misunderstood, became fuel for conspiracy theorists who were eager to twist tragedy into spectacle. And over the years, the myth hardened. It settled into the cracks of pop culture, becoming part of the poltergeist curse narrative that overshadowed Heather's real story. To Tammy, to Kathleen, to everyone who loved Heather, the rumors weren't just false, they were cruel. They robbed Heather of her innocence in the public eye long after she was gone. By the late 2000s, it was clear to the O'Rourke family that they needed something more permanent more powerful, more undeniable than scattered interviews or social media corrections. They needed a way to reclaim Heather's story, to silence the myths, to restore the truth, to show the world the child behind the legend. And that mission grew into a project that took decades to come to life. One final chance to speak for Heather in the way only her loved ones truly could. More than 3 decades after Heather O'Rourke's untimely death, her story remained shrouded in the same haze of confusion and myth that had formed in the chaotic days of 1988. The medical misdiagnosis, the wrongful death lawsuit, Henry Winkler's unsettling comments, the rumors of curses and conspiracies, every piece of a speculation had layered itself over her memory, burying the real Heather beneath mountains of fiction. For her family, the pain never faded, but neither did their determination. They knew the world had spent years hearing about the tragedy, the rumors, and the mystery, but rarely about the girl herself, the child they loved, the bright spirit who once lit up movie sets and classrooms with equal joy. They needed a way to reclaim her legacy, not through sensationalism, but through truth, not through rumors, but through remembrance. And that vision led to the creation of the 2023 documentary Heather O'Rourke, She Was Here. Directed by Nick Bailey, best known for his work on the Fan Counters podcast, the film wasn't born from Hollywood executives or journalists chasing headlines. It was created from the inside out, by the people who actually knew Heather, by those who had worked with her, protected her, and loved her. According to its IMDb summary, the documentary had a simple but powerful mission: to preserve Heather's real story, told only by voices who had truly been part of her life. The film includes interviews with her mother Kathleen, her sister Tammy, and several of her most respected co-stars, including Craig T. Nelson, JoBeth Williams, and Linda Pearl. Their memories paint a vivid portrait of Heather as she genuinely was: vibrant, intelligent, innocent, and endlessly curious. For the first time, the public gets to see never-before-seen photographs and home videos, small windows into a childhood overshadowed for too long by rumor. We see Heather as a sister, a daughter, a student, a friend, not a myth, not a conspiracy, a child. But perhaps the most important role of the documentary was to confront directly and without hesitation the darkest rumors attached to her name. It challenges the misinterpretations surrounding Henry Winkler's comments. It dismantles the baseless theories of abuse, and it clarifies once and for all that Heather's death was the tragic result of a rare, undetected medical condition, not foul play, not conspiracy, not supernatural influence. Tammy, once again, speaks with clarity and love. She rejects every false narrative and reminds the world that Heather lived a life surrounded by family and emotional safety. She was not a victim of Hollywood exploitation. She was a little girl who fell victim to a silent illness that even doctors failed to detect. She Was Here stands as a final authoritative voice, a film that restores Heather's identity and protects her legacy. It replaces decades of a speculation with truth. It replaces mystery with memory. It brings Heather back into focus as the child she really was, not the rumor she was turned into. And for the first time in decades, the world can finally see Heather clearly.